drink champagne, some die of thirst. No way of knowing which way it's going. Hope for the best, expect the worst. Hope for the best.
Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, September 19th, 2024. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Cottonetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Yes, we have the full house today. So much to talk about. We have the Federal Reserve unexpectedly lowering interest rates by 0.5%, or if you want to be incredibly pretentious, 50 basis points. We have interesting stuff going on in Capitol Hill. We have polling stuff. And of course, we need to talk about the Israeli strike on Hezbollah in Lebanon, which entered its second day of precision targeting, starting with beepers, then moving on to walkie-talkies or radios, handheld radios, I guess is they're now called. And the details, which really are now out of a Daniel Silva novel, that the Israelis set up a shadow company in Europe years ago to create the conditions under which Hezbollah would come to buy its equipment from them that they could then doctor in this fashion. We're just in this kind of like spycraft, statecraft, anti-terrorism craft, asymmetrical warfare craft that is thrilling. I don't know how else to put it. It's thrilling.
It's amazing. Yeah. I think the real question is, does this technological and intelligence sophistication have strategic results? And so I just made a list that I'm sure is incomplete, going back, now, gosh, more than a decade. But you think about the Stuxnet virus. You think about the nuclear archive and how Israel seized the nuclear archive and transported it back. You think about just more recently, the intelligence that was necessary to plant the bomb in the apartment in Tehran where Ismail Haniyeh was going to be staying for the inauguration of the new Iranian president. In connection to that, though it's unclear what happened exactly, we do have the fact that that new Iranian president was replacing the old Iranian president who died in a helicopter crash. It was cloudy, and helicopters are dangerous, but you never know. Now you have the pager plot, followed up by the walkie-talkies, and it's just...
And the solar panels.
And solar panels. And it's awe-inspiring. I mean... more than 30 dead, thousands of injured, definitely a cost in manpower to Hezbollah, a cost in materiel, because as many have observed, is Hezbollah going to pick up the phone? I mean, how are they going to communicate now? But in the back of my mind, I think, what is this? Is this moving toward making Israel safe? I do think it helps all of these things, especially the more recent events, again, the assassination of Shukr, help reestablish deterrence, along with the continuing pounding of Hamas in Gaza. But the Northerners who are still out of their homes have not yet been returned. And until I think Israel takes bolder action, they won't be.
But there is I think in some way this is more of a psychological warfare operation too, right? It said literally this technology that you've got on your person all the time that is your connection to your terrorist regime can at any moment explode. And the element of surprise, obviously. It's also a warning for all major powers that, know your supply chains. This is something that supply chains were something we were worried about during COVID because we couldn't get toilet paper. But there is something to be said for having security of your supply chains for important, crucial goods. But I agree with Matt that these are sort of wow factor operations, but on this one in particular, the psychological warfare aspect of it struck me as quite large. And then when you look at the reaction of the sort of pro-Hamas contingent in Congress, AOC calling it a human rights violation completely incorrectly, and the sort of emotional overreaction on the side of people who are sympathetic to Hamas and Hezbollah here in the United States, I think was interesting.
But there's also a practical impact here on on Hezbollah and Iran. They have to re-scramble everything. They have to figure out how they have to change protocol for everything they're doing. They have to question everyone that they're involved with, especially any third party. This is a huge sort of jam up in the works of what they're going to do. So if you're going to pull off a bolder move, and you're Israel, this is a good way to lay the foundation for it. I mean, because you've got them completely scrambled.
Well, and wasn't it supposed to be the beginning, something that they were planning to do before a major military strategic operation, and they maybe pulled the trigger on this sooner because they thought it might be exposed or it might be revealed?
Well, that is one story that is being retailed, and it has plausibility, because I kind of presumed once we heard about it that they were going to move in the next 18 hours. In other words, having literally crippled thousands of Hamas fighters, literally crippled them, they would therefore be in a better position to start rolling the tanks. Now, there is a deployment of Israeli materiel and tanks and forces to the north. And Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, told Lloyd Austin, our defense minister, that a war with the North was coming. So maybe it was too soon for the total effect, but it happened. There are still hundreds of people in the hospital. We don't know what net effect that will have on their readiness or their ability to counterstrike or whatever. I was thinking about the psychological effect in terms of the battle at Manassas that started the American Civil War. And if you remember, if you read your history, the rebels did this thing that came out of nowhere, which was the rebel yell, right? The Union troops were sort of amassed and in wonderful McClellan formation, and everything was pristine, and all these people rode out from Washington, D.C. to sit on the promontory like at a garden party to watch the Union Army take apart the rebels. And the rebels come out of nowhere screeching at the top of their lungs. And they scared the bejesus out of, excuse me, I'm sorry if that's not an acceptable word to use, but they terrified the Union soldiers and the spectators. And there is reason to believe that McClellan was never the same after not only, obviously, the result at Manassas, but this psychological effect of, these guys are terrifying. Like this is an army that they are scary as hell. And it's not that Hezbollah isn't scared of.
I would just like for our government not to rush to the microphones after one of these operations to disavow all knowledge and to kind of say, we have nothing to do with, we knew nothing about this. It would be helpful for the United States if we terrified our enemies, or even if we could recognize that Hezbollah is an enemy of the United States as much as it is an enemy of Israel. I think it was interesting that this happened when Amos Hochstein, the envoy who has been working for months to diplomatically encourage or broker some deal that would make Hezbollah move back behind the line of control that was established by the United Nations, he had just visited Israel right before the pager plot commenced. And at the same time, our Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is back in Cairo trying to figure out some type of deal to end the war in Gaza. I think at this point, Blinken should just invest in a timeshare in Cairo. I mean, I'm sure there's some properties there. I hope he's been able to see the pyramids, with all the time he's been spending there in a completely futile and debasing action in order to achieve the ceasefire, which not only is practically irrelevant right now, but it has no chance of success.
That's actually what I like to picture Blinken doing. In fact, I like to picture Blinken not having any discussions with his Egyptian counterparts at all, just going to see the pyramids. They're telling Biden, I'm going to get the ceasefire deal done. I'll see you later. And then he's at Giza,
Or they're playing backgammon. It's like, okay, come on in. I brought my Shesh kit. We're just waiting here for Sinwar to send a letter by hand to Khalid Mashal so that we have some negotiating position to go from. I mean, because Kamala Harris's entire Middle East policy is we need a ceasefire deal now. That is the entirety of her policy. Tell me, Vice President Harris, what policy differentiation would you have with the Biden administration on Gaza and the Middle East? She says, we need a ceasefire deal now. That's what she said to the National Association of Black Journalists the other day. So they're essentially acting now as an arm of the Harris campaign, pursuing this preposterous negotiation when, I hate to put it this way, but so we need a hostage deal, right? What we need is the hostages to be released. The ceasefire has effectively happened. Are we hearing about Israel bombing Gaza? Are there major military maneuvers in Gaza?
There was just a casualty the other day, we should point out, because Hamas has, booby-trapped every single building in Gaza, and one of these buildings exploded and there was a casualty. So there are Jews
it's not
dying.
That there aren't, right. It's not that there aren't casualties, but what is going on now, and has been really for the last 10 days in Gaza, is not an active war zone fight. The Israelis are in the tunnels, going through them 5 inches a day, whatever. Gazans are not being killed by the hundreds. This is a bizarre talking point, because she would be better served, in my view, saying we need to get the hostages out, which is that she's saying we need a ceasefire deal, not that we need to get the hostages out. There are still 4 Americans in those tunnels. 4 Americans.
I would bet you anything she doesn't know their names too. If a journalist actually asked her their name, she would not be able to give you their name.
We should parachute in a WNBA player into the tunnels so that she would know who that was. I mean, that is the sort of the most appalling aspect of this. By the way, the other thing that's happening, aside from AOC, as you mentioned, saying that blowing up a terrorist's pager is a human rights violation, is that Bernie Sanders is insisting on putting forward a sense of the Senate resolution that American arms to Israel should be embargoed. Now, who is that for? What is he doing? Why is he doing this now? And I think Matt's point about America should want to be thought of as being part of this operation because it's helpful to our deterrent position in the world. It's not just that. I'm sorry. This thing that just happened is going to be very popular with Americans, if it is not already. Americans do not like Arab terrorist groups. Americans like Israel. I know people in Brooklyn don't like Israel. I know that Americans 18 to 30 seem to be very ambiguous on Israel. This is the kind of thing that actually makes people go, that's kind of badass.
And that's the same thing with the taking out Shuker, as Matt mentioned before. The U.S. had just as much more reason, we should say, than anybody to take him out for decades. So I think that Americans look at it and say, yeah, I'm glad he's gone. I'm glad someone finally took him out, because he had American blood on his hands, and these hostage takers have American blood on their hands.
But the Shuker mission is about an individual person. You need to be relatively educated in the fight to sort of understand why that was a success. this is like a pop culture moment. This is a pop culture, something that would happen in a movie or on a TV show that just happened and that Israel pulled off, and that is almost miraculous in its wild success and fulfillment of some kind of melodramatic idea about how to fight terrorism. And the Democratic Party wants to keep its hands clean and walk away. And on TikTok right now, the Harris campaign is making these 15-second commercials of her saying what's happening in Gaza is terrible and there's too much Palestinian killing. Kamala Harris, your candidate for president. Like, they are trying to appeal directly now at a moment when Israel has had a wild success against a terrorist group hated by Americans, praising Kamala Harris or centering Kamala Harris as I wouldn't say a defender of Palestine or a defender of Gaza, but somebody who is more concerned about the lives in Gaza than she is about Israel winning the war. I think that's ill-timed.
But not concerned enough for the National Association of Black Journalists, who were disappointed, I think, in some of her verbiage when the issue of Israel and Hamas came up. I want to make another point about what this could portend for the final weeks of the presidential election. Because if the reaction from the international community and from the pro-Iran, pro-Hamas congressmen is, outrage and disgust at Israel's amazing ability to infiltrate Hezbollah, imagine what the reaction will be if Israel does cross into Lebanon in order to push Hezbollah back beyond the river so that the Israelis can go back to the north. I think it's a potential for a major event in the final weeks of the election, and it would force Harris to take some type of position, which, she's very good at avoiding. It's amazing. It's just important to recognize that this isn't Hamas. I mean, this isn't the, Gaza. It's not the West Bank. It's Lebanon. It's a separate country that a foreign-backed militia has taken over and is shooting rockets for years against another sovereign country with no consequences.
But I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I just want to say, the entire situation in the north of Israel is invisible to the radical activist class. They don't even know. They're focused on Gaza. To them, Israel is what's happening in Gaza. So the idea that any democratic leadership in the U.S. would embrace the pinpoint operations, the operations with the walkie-talkies and the beepers, that would never happen because they only know how to speak to, and poorly, Gaza and innocents being bombed there. They don't even have a vocabulary to talk about the history of what's happened in the north and the dynamic of it. They don't know the first thing about it.
Give them 12 hours, because you know as well as I do. No, but you know as well as I do that this isn't about Gaza. It's not about this. It's about Israel's existence and Israel's enemies, and they have basically become supporters of Israel's enemies or complicit or fellow travelers of Israel's enemies.
There have been Hezbollah flags at the encampments.
That's also true. And so I think it wouldn't take long if Israel starts rolling the tanks into southern Lebanon.
Oh, then they'd
for the suffering people of Lebanon showing a baby, in a tire
Harris
track.
will study the maps.
Right.
She'll study the maps of the north.
This is actually a
Israel
map that
can't go farther than this town here, this village here.
Yeah. But I mean, this is actually a map to be studied because this is a 40-year map or 30-year map or whatever, when the PLO started to occupy. So Israel has been engaged in pacifying southern Lebanon to protect its north for 42 years. 42 and a half years ago, Israel went into southern Lebanon to clear out PLO encampments because they were threatening communities in the north. The first Palestinian strike against Israel, the origin of the Palestine Liberation Organization, came in 1964 across the Lebanese border. So you could say it's, what is that, 60 years, not even 40 years.
And the important thing there is that every time it was a state within a state. It was never like Lebanon.
Right.
Israel's going to war with
the government of Lebanon. That's
not
right.
the government of Lebanon. It never. None of those wars were technically with Lebanon, the government. In fact, in 1982, when they had the first Lebanon war, Ariel Sharon was trying to arrange these alliance with certain Christian Lebanese leaders and trying to even, have a say in who was going to be the next president and whatever. And he did it once. And then a few weeks later, that president was blown up. But the point is that they were always trying to deal with Lebanon to pacify this part of Lebanon.
Right. So this is a 40-year history. Israel occupied the area south of the Litani River for 16 years, and then unilaterally pulled back with a UN guarantee that that area would be demilitarized, Israel would be protected by UNIFIL, and 7 years after that unilateral withdrawal, Israel had to roll the tanks in to pacify Lebanon again, and then came out after 32 days when Condoleezza Rice, our Secretary of State, a pro-Israel Secretary of State, said, no, that's enough. Sorry, you've gone too far. War's too long. I can't handle it anymore. They pull back, and then for the next 17 years, Hezbollah amasses 300,000 warheads of some sort or other in and around this area. And beginning on October 8th, 2023, 13, 15, 17,000 rockets have been fired at Israel from Hezbollah redoubts in Lebanon, unprovoked. Remember, Israel is not fighting with Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israel is forbearing the fight with Hezbollah in Lebanon because it is focusing itself on the fight in Gaza. And so the Hezbollah has had these free shots for almost a year. This is the first serious counter-response. I mean, military, anti-terrorism. I mean, there have been hits and things like that and targeted assassinations. But this is an entirely unprovoked war that Hezbollah has been waging against Israel. And Israel is now fighting back. And it will take 12 to 18 to 24 hours for all of those people, the Democratic Socialists of America and Bernie Sanders and AOC, to start crying crocodile tears about people they do not care about and that they could give less of a shit about, excuse my French, because they just don't like Israel and they think if Israel does things, it's bad and Israel should be stopped. And it's insane that Sanders is introducing this right now. I mean, I think he wants Harris to. I don't see how this helps Harris. I don't see how this resolution, either if it goes down, number one, which it will. I mean, I think Chuck Schumer, the Senate Majority Leader, will do whatever he can, if he can, to make sure that this vote doesn't.
It doesn't help Harris, but remember Bernie Sanders on a recent Sunday show where he said, well, Harris is just saying whatever she needs to say to win the election. I know that her values are my values.
Right.
So if anything, it can hurt Harris if the Republican candidate was able to seize on issues and explain to the public why these issues matter and the differences on policy between the candidates could shape their lives for the next 4 years.
Can we talk about the Hill for a second then, since we're now talking about the Hill? So we are on the verge of a potential government shutdown again, September 30th. Whatever is the continuing resolutions that keep the government funded expire, or they whatever you call it, and they need to pass measures just to keep the government open. And once again, radicals in the Republican caucus are putting the screws to Speaker Mike Johnson, who is attempting to create a 6-month stopgap. We'll just put the money out and keep this going until after the election. And he was compelled to attach a voter security measure to this continuing resolution proposal that, of course, all the Democrats voted against, and
I don't think
failed.
the SAVE Act is what killed this continuing resolution. So we should say the SAVE Act is makes it illegal for illegal immigrants to vote in elections, and includes more measures to crack down on that practice. It is already illegal for an illegal immigrant to vote in an election.
So that's why we need another law to say it again.
This law might be more effective.
Because now we really mean it.
This law might be more effective.
Okay.
However, that's not what killed the CR. The reason the CR failed, and the CR continuing resolution to fund the government, is that the continuing resolution that Speaker Johnson put forward included the SAVE Act, but it was also only 6 months. It was 6 months to take us into the next year. This is very important for conservatives who don't want us to end up in the typical place where we end up, which is that we have to pass an omnibus bill at the end of the year around Christmas time that no one pays attention to, and that appropriators just fill up with tons of wasteful spending and often policy riders that conservatives don't like. So Johnson told the conservatives, I'll give you 6 months that will kick it into the new Congress, potentially.
Because ordinarily, you should add, ordinarily it would be 3 months. The classic.
That's what Schumer wants, right? To get us through December to the lame duck for the omnibus.
So they can load up the omnibus with trash, with money spending trash.
Exactly. And that's what conservatives don't want. So this CR came to the floor, and what the problem there was, defense hawks didn't like the 6 month CR. So there were defense-minded Republicans who voted against it, along with every Democrat. Democrats going to vote against it because they want to embarrass Johnson and everything. So now it's gone down, and we have about 10 days as we speak before a government shutdown, and Johnson has to figure out what is his next play. I note that Heritage Action, which is very influential on the Hill among House Republicans, says that the next move is to just have a clean continuing resolution. So I wouldn't be surprised if he goes to the floor again with just 6 months spending, no SAVE Act, and then dare the Democrats to vote against that. It could still go down because of the defense appropriators don't like the 6 month time frame. They think that it endangers national security and procurement.
Well, of course, these are all opening bid. This is an opening bid moment. It's the 19th. There's 11 days. That's actually rather a long time on Capitol Hill for once they get some kind of a number that will make it pass. It'll happen. I mean,
what will happen is an omnibus. That's what happens every single time.
Right.
And it's extraordinarily frustrating. And if it does happen and the Republicans lose in November, that could spell big trouble for Speaker Johnson and the House leadership. Not only would he not be Speaker if the Democrats win control of the House, but he could potentially lose his leadership position as well in the aftermath if conservatives are unhappy with the way that the omnibus is eventually passed.
Of course, there would have to be another speaker. So then we go back into the period of the false Dimitris, in which we're going to have 72 different candidates for speaker and 211 votes for speaker. They're lucky to have him. He's quieted things down. He's clearly an adult in the room.
He's smart.
He's been very impressive in his handling of this job. So it makes sense that lunatics might want. I don't mean that the defense hawks are lunatics, and I doubt that they would want to defenestrate him. That's not who the defenestrators are. Interesting details in some polling that came out just like this morning, that potential good news for Republicans. My presumption has been over the last month that this national shift in the national polls toward Harris, which the polling today casts some doubt on, but let's just stipulate with this idea that Harris has sort of moved the polls 2 or 3 points in her favor nationally, was very jeopardizing to Johnson and Republicans in the House, because basically the majority for Republicans, which is what, 2 seats? I can't even remember what
It's
it
a
is now.
5-seat majority
5-seat majority. Those 5 seats are all in New York State.
in California.
Or 4 in California. And if there is a national shift toward Harris, it is precisely in the states like New York and California where she can run up numbers, or where Democrats are coming home and all that, where there's massive Democratic voter, registration and all that in their Democratic states, where the surprise results, particularly in New York in 2022, that got 4 or 5 Republicans into the House, can be reversed, because it's not a midterm election, it's a general election. The electorate will be larger. There will be more Democrats voting. There'll be more Democrats voting in those districts, and Republicans have no margin for error. The Siena poll that came out of New York State today does not have Harris with great numbers. I mean, they're fine. She's up 12 points, but she's not up 20 points. And there are some interesting numbers inside this poll. Interesting numbers. Her approval rating is not that high. Biden's approval rating is not that high. Trump's approval rating is pretty high for him in New York. It's like 47 favorable, 52 unfavorable. That is like, I don't know what that is. That is a crazy high number for Trump in a Democratic state. And then there is the thing I got to mention, could be like just a wild anomaly. Trump is leading among Jews in New York State 54-44 in this poll. Now, there could be 80 Jews in the poll. I couldn't tell from the crosstabs what the absolute numbers were. It can't be much more than 80, I think, or 100. So, the margin of error could be huge. But whatever, he's doing better than any Republican has among Jews in
think
decades.
about what Pew saw. I mean, the Pew poll has a much larger field that it surveys, and it had the race tied nationally when it came out, I think, about 2 weeks ago. But more interestingly to me, it had Harris winning the lowest share of the Jewish vote than any Democrat since 1988. And when you consider that yesterday the Teamsters came out and said they would not endorse a candidate, the last time they did that was 1988 as well.
Right.
So there are below the surface of these very confusing and, just kind of mind-numbing polls.
Well, and also
we get polls every hour. Below the surface of them, though, you see weird things happening among subgroups that
and so therefore
almost are good for Trump. I mean,
well, that's it.
Anyway.
The Teamsters thing was they didn't endorse because Trump won the Teamsters internal poll. Isn't that right?
That's what we're hearing. Yeah,
where he won 60%.
They released
of the mailer.
that. Yeah, he won between Biden and Trump of the polling of the Teamsters membership. Biden was slightly ahead, but when on the screen was Trump versus Harris, Trump among Teamsters wins like by
60,
30
40.
points. Yeah,
it was
incredible.
20 points.
20 to 30 points.
Right. So you don't want to go too far into these internals, but I want to just make this point about the Jewish vote. If the Jewish vote is more sympathetic to Trump, meaning it goes from 30 to 40, let's say, which would be oceanic in this regard, the Jewish vote does have a national valence. And it doesn't just have a national valence. 40% of the Jews in the United States live in and around New York City. So that's why a New York poll is suggestive not only of New York, but of elsewhere. And Pennsylvania is like razor thin, neck and neck, half a point between them. And there are 400,000 Jews in Pennsylvania. And if Trump overperforms in Pennsylvania, that could be a 30 to 40,000 vote shift toward Trump. And Biden only won Pennsylvania by 80,000 votes. I've been retailing this for a month now. I'm told that, serious private polling is skeptical of these numbers and that it's assumed that Jews will come home to the Democratic Party. But again, the shift doesn't have to be that much if Pennsylvania ends up coming down, being like 2016, where I think it was 20,000 votes.
Well, and what will
that Trump won by?
And what is Harris going to do on October 7th? What's going to happen on college campuses and across this country on October 7th? Addressing that's going to be on people's minds, and certainly we're going to be seeing things, I fear, that will also shift people's willingness to go to the ballot box and say, you know what, anything but that. This party no longer cares about the Jews. So I think there's still a lot of potential shift in terms of events. There's also the, on the economic front, and particularly in Pennsylvania, a weird, almost underminer campaign on the part of the Biden people. He's going out now to tout Bidenomics again, which has to be a passive aggressive thing to do, because they must know that first of all, it failed the first time he did it, when he went out to tout it when he was the candidate, and he's doing it again now that she's really struggling on that issue and doesn't want to give any more interviews and is hesitant to have anything more than talking points. So I feel there's something going on in the Democratic Party right now that we're not all privy to. That. The psychological dynamics are interesting to me. I think the October 7th thing is a really important point, because it has the potential, because it's a known unknown, right? To go back to that, we know things will happen on October 7th. We don't know what those things will be. We know that in addition to protesters, we know that there have been planned attacks, because we've intercepted them, to celebrate, to mark the anniversary with attacks on them. There's no reason to think that isn't the case outside of the United States. There's no reason to think that there aren't people planning something in, Western Europe, in the Middle East. There's, what will happen outside our embassies on October 7th.
But can we pause for a moment and just think about how repulsive this conversation is? We are talking about commemorations of a slaughter spree that the forces that are in support of the murderers and terrorists on October 7th, we're now assuming are going to take over or be the dominating factor on the anniversary of that date. It would be as though
they've made clear they want to do just that.
September 11th, 2022 led to worldwide rallies in support of Al-Qaeda. I mean, let's just sort of follow through the logic of what's going on here. I don't know what's going on inside the Jewish community and its discussions of how to deal with this on a national or even worldwide scale. I know what's sort of going on at my school and in my neighborhood and that sort of thing. And it's obviously a very weird thing. Like you wouldn't have a rally to commemorate a day of horror, but some kind of Jewish show of force or solidarity in mass numbers would be a counter strike, at least to what we are envisioning here. And I'm not hearing my, yes, go ahead.
And I'll add, I mean, I just think, I just am very curious to see what Harris is going to say and do on that day, in part because there's a large gathering in Washington today that Trump is speaking to of Jewish leaders. And Harris was invited, Biden was invited, both of them declined to attend. She is avoiding any situation where she actually has to speak in a straightforward, off-the-cuff way about not just saying, oh, we support Israel, but not having to then pivot or add the caveat or acknowledge her TikTok targeted ads to voters in Dearborn.
See, I think she's fine as long as Jews are victims. Liberals can talk about victims all day long. What gets them in trouble is when Jews assert themselves and when Israel asserts itself and fights back. Then they don't know what to do because they see everything through the reality of victim, victimizer, oppressor, oppressed.
But there's a rank of victimhood, and if you judge how she speaks about victimhood, it's the Palestinians who are the prime victims, and the Jews are the secondary victims. In terms of, if you just look at her public statements about who are the greatest victims.
Let's say that she leaves the Palestinian victimhood narrative out of her talking points on that day. Let's say she speaks purely.
It's a low bar to clear.
to extremely low bar to clear, and I'm not confident that she'll clear it. But let's say she does, and she speaks purely to the attack on Israel and the horrific terrorists of Hamas. There will still be all sorts of high-profile Democratic figures saying all the wrong things everywhere. And I think that's a big piece of the numbers we're seeing, the Jewish numbers for Trump. It's not just this candidate or that candidate. It's been a saturation, excuse me, a saturation effect whereby for the past year almost, they've seen a party that is not willing to let go of, reject, and denounce a segment of the population that wants them, Jews, dead.
And Americans.
And Americans.
Yeah, they're borrowing, SDS slogans, remember, bring the war home, things like that. They're, and they're in all these articles saying, well, we have to dismantle the entire system of colonization, which means this college, there's kids at Columbia saying we have to dismantle the college and everything this college is built on and everything this state is built on.
Well, I want to remind you, by the way, that the guy in Newton, Massachusetts, who tackled the Zionist supporter, ran across the street, tackled him, was pulled off him, jumped on him again, and then Mr. Shaw had a gun and shot him. You look at his Twitter feed, that's what he says. The entire Twitter feed is this entire system is corrupt and has to be replaced. All of America. I hate America. Our Constitution is, should be he shows on his Twitter feed the shoe in Who Framed Roger Rabbit being dipped into the dip and being destroyed, and he wants that to be the Constitution.
I mean, that's the BLM ideology, though. I mean, that's what happened is BLM has embraced the Hamas cause, and just as in 2020, the Democrats were in this weird position triangulating off BLM. They wanted to be associated with Black Lives Matter as, a racial justice cause. And Kamala, of course, said we should keep fighting. But then if it was violent, it was in trouble. It's the same thing here, which I think Abe is saying absolutely correctly, that, think about what happened at the University of Maryland with its atrocious president who granted the MSA, the Muslim Student Association's appeal to have an event on campus on October 7th. And finally, Democrats in Maryland had to pressure him to say, no, that's not a good idea. And he canceled the permit. That type
and Larry Hogan, by the way.
And Larry Hogan
was
very forcefully.
Larry Hogan
they canceled.
Isn't the group suing? I think the group is now suing the university.
His Democratic rival had not spoken up until they announced that they were canceling.
So it's like, oh my God, Larry Hogan's polling really well. We better not have a pro-Hamas demonstration.
He made an issue of it
by
too.
A government official a Democratic government official here in Maryland running the University of Maryland. Gee, why don't you give him a month's worth of publicity so that he can win the Senate race in Maryland?
They're suing the school, by the way, for revoking the permit.
Federal Reserve under Jay Powell announces its 0.5 percentage point interest rate cut. Donald Trump immediately says this stinks of politics. Others say it stinks. CNN said it stinks of politics. One thing to cut by 25 basis points, but it's another to do this big cut. And then there's an interesting political aspect to this because you say, okay, they're just trying to help the Democrats. Well, first of all, practically speaking, I don't know. Some of this has already been anticipated, so interest rates have already been coming down. They're not going to come down 3 points so that suddenly, a mortgage is going to be cheap the way it was 4 years ago. But the classic way of reading a serious interest rate cut is that it is a vote of no confidence in the economy, not a vote of confidence in the economy. It is, we need to goose demand, we have to get people borrowing money because things aren't good. And I don't know that maybe it's too technical an issue or too macroeconomic an issue for it to penetrate to voters. But what do you guys think? Does this have a net political effect for anybody?
I'm not sure what the net political effect is. There are two economies. There's Mr. Market, and then there's the economy that people experience as workers and employees. Mr. Market loves this. and they're very excited. Wall Street wanted a big cut, and it seems like markets today, as we're speaking in the morning on September 19th, are greeting it pretty favorably. But it just goes to show there's a divide. The market has been off on a winning streak now for years. I mean, we're another record
high.
We're at
42,000.
We're almost at 42,000, right? But if you look at people's views of the economy, there's been some improvement in recent months, but not a whole lot. People continue to not like this economy. And when you consider the signs that the labor market, it has been cooling. And when you think about all the revisions to earlier jobs numbers that have been made recently, I think this is a sign that the Fed is deeply worried about where things are headed, but also kind of potentially reckless, because the fact is inflation has not come down to where we want it, and it's not come down in a sustainable way to where we want it. So I think this is a move that is maybe a panic move, but one that also will make investors happy, at least for a little while.
But there's the political fallout for Harris, I think, is that because she doesn't want to talk in depth about the economy, because it hasn't been good under Biden-Harris, she is left sort of not speaking to those concerns. But people who don't follow this stuff closely often hear, and Powell did this himself at his press conference yesterday. He was very much like, things are looking better. Let's be happy about this. But if you're a person struggling to still pay the grocery bill, or you've started to borrow more money and not be able to pay it back just to kind of cover regular expenses in your household, it doesn't seem that way. And so it's the same thing, same mistake they've been making recently about the border. Oh, border crossings are down. Okay, but people are living in a world where all of your previous several years of mistakes about the border and about the economy, they're still living in that world because that's the world you made for them. So to tell them, actually, it's improving when they don't feel that improvement, as Matt says, is going to lead to a great deal of skepticism about whether this, and it does, again, it links her back to the Biden administration, which she's been trying very delicately to move herself away from.
I want to conclude before we get to the commentary recommends with I want to a mea culpa myself about polling, and then talk a little bit about this. So again, we got a huge spate of polls today, and what they show is a tide race. They really do show a tide race, like not just nationally, but state by state. Everything's within the margin of error. Harris looks a little better in the weird poll. The New York Times poll has them tied, but her ahead by 3 or 4 in Pennsylvania. That is not a sort of normal result, as Nate Cohn, their polling meister, says. Like that doesn't jibe or track precisely. You would think that those numbers would move in tandem, so there may be some weird noise or statistical blips or whatever. But you can't look at this 5-6 different polls, releasing battleground polls and national polls, and not say it's a 48-48 race, a 47-47 race, or whatever. And I fell for last week's not like still half people hadn't digested the debate yet and all this. And I really thought, okay, you know what? She won the debate. Everybody agrees she won the debate. And all these polls say she won the debate. And that Trump was acting crazy and talking about eating dogs and wasn't letting go of it and all of that. And that she was not pulling ahead, but that she was establishing a beachhead, a point or two ahead. And part of that is just the result of being so deep within the hour by hour analyses, spins, everything. And I falsely prided myself on the idea that I was relatively immune to the irrational exuberance of liberals and the media and all of that when it comes to things like this. And I am a little embarrassed that I didn't keep my powder dry in thinking that this race is the race that it is, which is the same race that it's been, even with the switch, since January 23.
I think Democrats are excited by her. I think there are voters in the middle who are intrigued by her, but they're not sold on her. And that's what gives us the race we have, which is effectively tied. Independent voters, I always try to keep track of where independents are. They're basically split even, right? With a lot of, I think, remaining independents who are undecided. There's a real risk here for a lot of people in the political class to just ignore the lessons of 2016. Right? She's running in the RCP average, I think, slightly ahead of where Hillary was at this point in 2016, but not by a lot. And let's just keep in mind, up until Election Day, if these numbers continue to hold, the entire world thought Hillary Clinton was going to win on Election Day 2016, including Donald Trump. And so I just find it immensely frustrating when people think, it's all done. It won't be done until election night. And sad to say, probably not for a few days after that.
Wow. That's going to be an interesting period in American life.
It'll be a sad period for America. And,
multi-day,
as usual, it's the liberals' fault, because if they only got off their duff and made them count the ballots quickly and had election ID just like every other Western democracy, we wouldn't have to wait days after the election, or in California where you have to wait months.
Right, and have lawsuits 2 hours before polls close to claim that polls need to remain open because people are waiting online and stuff like that. It's like you'd only have 4 years to prepare to vote on election day and get there voting. And that's
the other thing about the lines on election day is like, well, you could have been voting in some places for weeks.
Right. But I think when we look at Trump, Patrick Ruffini, Echelon Insights, Republican, honest, a pollster, poll analyst, said if you're seeing Harris doing unexpectedly well in the Rust Belt states right now, start having nightmares that you are back in 2016. This is what they did to Hillary in 2016. They gave Hillary a false sense of confidence so she didn't go back to Michigan and campaign there for 3 days in the last week, because they had a machine that told, they had a magic vote predictor machine that told her that she had Michigan in the bag. And the other thing that unnerves me is we don't know the size of the electorate. If there are signs of renewed Democratic enthusiasm, and they're doing likely voter screens, which means that they're trying to figure out, since 100% of adults theoretically can vote, but only 55 to 65% of Americans do vote, there is always this effort to try to model the electorate so that you can get a more precise expectation of what the vote result will be on election day. But as the electorate has grown over the last 25 years, the national electorate from about 50, 52, 53% to the mid 60s, the likely voter screens are now just works of art. They are Nostradamus predictions, and they have absolutely no idea who is going to be voting this November.
Well,
we have a switch in a candidate. We have this third time running former president. We don't know if he creates enthusiasm or if he retards enthusiasm. We don't know if her entry in the race creates enthusiasm or is going to retard enthusiasm with the very people that pulled the election toward Biden and away from Trump. White males pulled the election toward Biden. Can she do that? We don't know. They don't know. Polls of adults are probably going to be better than likely voter polls. And that used to be exactly the opposite of the case. And we are in a very position in which we cannot trust what we're seeing.
But John, I do have to say, I think you've been a little unfair to the Harris campaign, because they are thoughtfully concerned about courting those voters. I'm sure particularly those male voters in Michigan. So they've sent Jane Fonda door to door. So that is going to be a turning point in this election. Unlike Hillary, she won't have to claim that she didn't take Michigan seriously.
Did you see the picture of Jane Fonda going door to door?
Yes, I saw some video.
I said to you, who is that person? would you have been able to say that's Jane Fonda if you hadn't watched Grace and Frankie in the last couple of years? If you hadn't seen Jane Fonda in 10 years, would you have known that was Jane Fonda? I would not have known that was Jane Fonda. This is the plastic surgery to rival Jennifer Grey's plastic surgery, where she had the plastic surgery and was no longer Jennifer Grey. And she herself now acknowledges, the star of Dirty Dancing, that she destroyed her career by getting plastic surgery to make herself nominally prettier, and no one knew who she was and no one wanted to cast her anymore. Jane Fonda is 85 years old or something like that, so she's doing whatever she can, but my God, she's not Jane Fonda. I don't know who. It's interesting. That's just we're just going anywhere. So now, Matt Continetti, you have the commentary recommends, which is probably not Grace and Frankie on Netflix, but go ahead.
It is not. I'm sorry to say. Today, I'd like to recommend an author who I've just become obsessed with. Her name is Katherine Rundell, Rundell, and she is a children's novelist. So kind of think upper elementary grades, early middle school. And she has a new book out called Impossible Creatures, which is the beginning of a series. I have not read that, but learning about Katherine Rundell in recent weeks, I went back to some of her earlier books. And so today I'd like to recommend a book called The Explorer, which is an excellent adventure novel for kids and for their parents. And now I'm currently reading and almost finished with another of her books. She wrote 4 before this new one. Called The Wolf Wilder, which is set in pre-revolutionary Russia. And Rundell is a fantastic writer. She has a great gift for language and character, but she's also great in that she has kind of rehabilitated the adventure novel. So even though this new book, Impossible Creatures, is a fantasy, her earlier books are all kind of adventure stories, and they feature kids in the kind of journey plots, where they have to encounter challenges and overcome them. And she does it with humor and beautiful language and just captivating prose. So Katherine Rundell, try The Explorer, try The Wolf Wilder, and then try Impossible Creatures, because I'm sure it's just as good. I'm reading them all.
Can I just say, when you mentioned her name, and I was like, ooh, I'd never heard of her as a novelist, but there was something bothering me. So as you were talking, I went to Wikipedia and I hit it, which is that she doesn't just write fiction. She is an academic, and she wrote a book in 2022 that I happened to consult because my daughter, who was in high school, was working on John Donne, the 16th century British poet, and she wrote a book called Super Infinite: The Transformations of John Donne, because my daughter was Donne is a very difficult poet, and brilliant, the greatest sort of modern English poet, the first modern poet, really, but it's very hard to make sense out of in certain ways. His antecedents are all, you can't figure out what he's talking about. And so we were struggling through the understanding of a certain poem. And I found this book, which had just been published, and its lucidity and clarity were incredibly helpful to me as somebody who has always loved Donne, but every now and then is like, this is just Esperanto. Like I can't follow it line by line. So she is clearly a very, very impressive person of great range, and she is annoyingly 37 years old, which is just, I'm sorry, you can't write all these great novels and an
I'm excited.
Piece of analysis.
She's got many more books to come, and don't be scared by the fact that she is a children's writer, because even childless cat ladies will enjoy these novels. I guarantee it.
Now that's an endorsement.
There we go. So that's Katherine Rundell. And I should mention that last night I was looking for something to read late at night. I was whatever, and I was scrolling through, because I use Apple Books, the Books app, because you can't get to Amazon through your iPhone. And I was scrolling down the list of nonfiction bestsellers, and at number 17 on the Apple nonfiction bestseller list was The Extinction of Experience, Being Human in a Disembodied World by Christine Rosen. So Christine Rosen has an Apple Books nonfiction bestseller. And if you go to Amazon right now, it says on her page, bestseller, as your book is number 1 in media studies, it says. So you have that coveted orange bestseller banner.
I didn't even understand what any of that meant. And they disappear, the minute you fall below whatever the algorithm
I know, but in any case, number 17.
But once they appear once, you can put that on your CV.
That's correct. That's correct. That's right. My book, Bush Country, hit the long New York Times bestseller list for 2 weeks. So I am now and forever the author of a New York Times bestseller. It never even hit the book review page because it hit 16, didn't go to 15, but it was still considered that. You have an Amazon bestseller, and it's deserved. Everyone should go and read Christine's book, The Extinction of Experience, and of course, Catherine Rundell's novels. We'll be back tomorrow for Abe, Christine, Seth, and Matt. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.